right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. The power of words. Though we've all been reminded to be careful about the words we speak or the thoughts we think, most are still unaware of the very real consequences of not taking responsibility for what comes out of our mouths or lives in our minds. Steven Halpern, accomplished musician and sound scientist, lays out a brilliant and well-informed explanation about how words can literally affect our body, mind, and our overall lifestyle. I brought Steven in based on an account of someone I personally know who can speak firsthand about how a recent experience in which the word she was contracted to speak temporarily turned her world upside down. Take a listen. Steven, I recently shared with you a story of someone I know who is a professional voiceover artist, and she was recently contracted through her agent to record an audiobook. In fact, it was a series of audiobooks that, as she told me, paid quite well, pretty well. So I want to set this story up for you because this is what we're going to be talking about. I want to set it up. You've actually heard it. I want our audience to kind of get a context for where we're going to go here. So essentially, after going into the studio, this young lady, for several days to record this book, she called me to share her experience, which she said was horrifying, to say the least. Now, this book, and I'm not going to name it, of course, I'm not going to mention the title, was, by her description, the most vile, disgusting, and degrading she had ever laid her eyes on. Now, rather than my retelling all of the details about her experience, I want you to hear directly from her. And by the way, through this recording, I've deleted all the names in this account for obvious reasons, her name as well as her agent. And then we're going to delve into the effects of words, and in this case, ugly words, and the very real physical and mental, spiritual, and emotional consequences that certain words can have on us. So let's take a listen, and we'll be right back.
So here is a very brief synopsis of my audiobook experience. And I'll just start by saying that the whole world of voiceover has changed significantly for me in the past, 5 to 7 years, where there haven't been as many commercial opportunities where you make, good money, residual work, get residual payments. So when my agent came to me and said that there was a good opportunity to record audiobooks, she said she had one book for me, so I got very excited, and I went by to pick up the manuscript and started reading it, and I realized, oh my goodness, this is basically pornography, but it was very graphic and kind of brutal. And the story took place basically in the projects, the black community, a lot of drug situations, prostitution, pimps, brutally beating women. And so I'm reading this and thinking, oh my goodness, this is not what I expected it to be. Although my agent did say, the language can be a little bad, so you may want to think of using a pseudonym. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine, bad language, I can deal with that. But it was more than just bad language. It was situations that just made me feel very uncomfortable reading about. So when I go to the studio, I had to travel quite far, actually. It was an hour's commute to Brooklyn to record in this studio. So that right there was, kind of a feeling of just dread and a lot of work associated with it. So I go and I'm sitting in this small, very contained recording booth, and I'm saying these words, just every profanity you can think of, and men doing brutally sexually explicit acts, rape, basically, to other women. And it really got to me. That first day, I left the studio feeling almost shell-shocked. And I got home and I said, oh my goodness, I have to go back and do this again. And so I had to go back 3 more days to finish recording. And each day I felt like I had been almost attacked, brutally attacked. So I finally finished, and my agent called and left a message and said, I have at least another 2 or 3 books for you to record in the series. Isn't that great? And she proceeded to give me all these dates. So it was like another 8 dates of recording. And I said to myself, I cannot do this. As much as I need the money, and as much as, our household could have used these checks, I said, I can't do it. It was damaging to my spirit. And the thought of going back for another 8 days, and probably many more days, because there was a whole series of books that they wanted. I called my agent and I said, I don't think I can do this. And she said, you have to follow your heart. And, the money's okay, but it's not great. And you have to do what makes you feel good. And if being in this situation gives you this kind of anxiety, then you shouldn't do it. And I told her, I said, sitting in that recording booth and having those words reverberate in my ears. I have headphones on, speaking into a mic, and those words are it's just like an even stronger impact when you're speaking into a mic and then you hear those words coming back at you, and you're in this small confined space. I felt like it was doing damage to me as a woman, as a human being. And I'm also in the process of healing from shoulder surgery. I had surgery back in January, and I felt like it was doing something physically to my body, and possibly inhibiting the healing process, because I felt, emotionally sick. And I thought that it might be doing some sort of physical damage to me as well. I really felt that. So my agent said, I'm talking to you as a friend now, not as your agent, and you do what you have to do. If you feel like you can't do this anymore, I'm behind you 100%. There will be other opportunities and better opportunities. And for probably the first time in my voiceover career, I turned down money because I felt that my emotional health was so much more important than my financial well-being. And my husband backed me up 100%. And once I made that decision to not continue with the recordings, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and the sunshine came back into my life. My spirit felt lighter, and I have not regretted it once since. So that's the story. Thank you.
What happened here, Steven, was that she called me, as I said before, because some of you out there know that I, too, also do voiceover work. And in fact, I'm about to go into the studio to record an audiobook this week for myself, actually for a fellow author. But I'm going to call this friend that you just heard from Sue, not her real name. So Sue and I like to bounce things off of each other, particularly as it pertains to the careers that we have in common. And she, sort of knowing my philosophy about such matters, felt that I would have something to say about her experience. She was, in fact, at that point contemplating, when she called me, backing out of this contract because of the content of the book that you heard her describe in explicit detail. So again, I'd like to focus the discussion on this aspect of sound. And you know, Steven Halpern, that I refer to you as the sound scientist. You are my go-to person for everything on sound and beyond. So take it away, Steven. Give us your initial thoughts after having listened to this.
Well, my initial thoughts come from also my experience as well as some of the latest research. She's absolutely right. What we were told throughout our life, that sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never harm me, is wrong. That's now been proven by people like Dr. Bruce Lipton, dealing with communicating with our DNA, communicating with our genes. We can speak to our consciousness and our cells with the English language, and all these have impressions. The science of subliminal communication proves that what we say to ourselves, what we hear, or what we see can have an effect. And just resonating with what Sue mentioned, from my own life, I knew even as a kid, when I was playing, or as a teenager playing in bands, there were certain songs I definitely did not want to sing. It's one of the reasons I wasn't the lead singer, because saying some of the depressing blues lyrics, or another one of the I Lost My Babies country and western songs, or I woke up this morning and felt so bad, intuitively I knew that was having a downer effect on me. And the next day or later that day, I would just feel my energy and feel more depressed. And I said, well, I was feeling pretty good before I sang that song. Could that be having an effect? And there was no research to back that up. Well, now in 2017, and for the last 10 or 15 years, we have more research going on in the field of epigenetics. We have in the work of Dr. Emoto in Japan. We can see the effect, the physical effect of negative thought forms and energy fields. And this is what it really comes down to, is words have an energy, emotions have an energy, and whether it's in music, which has been my focus, or just the words, which are so much easier to understand, we now know that if you know how to, and have formats in which you can measure the effects, that you can see that this is not all in your head. It's in your cells, it's in the energy fields, and it really does have a negative effect.
Well, you know, I'm glad you brought up Masaru Emoto, the late Masaru Emoto, because I have a feeling there are a lot in our audience that are familiar with his work, but for the benefit of those that don't, could you give a thumbnail of what he did to show the effect of words on water, particularly?
Okay, Dr. Emoto pioneered a technique of quick freezing water to create crystalline shapes. And when he would either have people speak words into a glass of water, or into a slide of water, let's say, that's probably where they took the drop from, or even just write a word on a piece of paper and tape that to the slide or the pitcher of water, the evoked image, when the water was frozen and then photographed, the ice crystals that resulted from words like love and peace and beauty were beautiful snowflake type images. The images that he published from negative words or angry words or darkness infused words, negative consciousness, created non-geometrical, non-beautiful, very scattered and very dissonant images. Now, what was also so interesting is that this would work in the English language, but of course, being Japanese, he used Japanese characters and languages as well, and it worked in that language. So his understanding was this is a cross-cultural vibrational resonance, And this is why it's so important to monitor what you say and what you think. It's the same thing that many of the New Thought ministers and maybe some of the traditional teachers, spiritual teachers, have spoken about in terms of not re-speaking negativity or maybe even gossip, because it not only hurts the person you're talking about, but hurts you just to be saying it. And with Sue's situation, just to be reading those words would kind of bring that into her own experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so she was definitely picking up on honoring her own spirit and honoring her own well-being.
Right. Well, you bring up a couple of good points that I don't want to lose my train of thought on. The first was the last thing that you said in terms of her reading these words, but we all know that when you're doing an audiobook, you're doing more than reading, you're speaking them. I should say, I don't know if I've told you this, Stephen, but Sue actually had done some recording. I mean, the agent, I think, wanted her to do a number of books. So she actually had to go through with one of those books. So not only was she reading, as in, going over the manuscript, she was acting them out, these characters and all this vile language in a confined space. So we're not even talking about thinking or reading. We're talking about the verbal, the reverberation of her voice, even in going into the atmosphere. And the effect that would have, I would dare say, would be more like speaking those words of hate or love into water. And just one more little point I want to make, and maybe have you comment on both of these things, is, I've always been fascinated with how water behaves under certain conditions. And in fact, I did an experiment several years ago where I took a glass of water and put it in front of a speaker which was playing, get this, the sound of the sun. Yes, there's actually a recording of the sound of the sun. Well, make a long story short, I did some measurements. I did this for a few days. I did some dowsing over a before and after playing the sound of the sun on this water. And Stephen, the effect, the oscillation changed every single time before and after. And that proved to me that it was having some effect on the structure of the water. So my point is, let's take a little bit of a syllogism here. If water can be affected by sound, and measurably so, as I showed, and we're comprised of over 70% water, I don't know what the exact amount is, but it's a lot, we can pretty much surmise that we're being affected physically by this sound. The water within us is being structured.
Absolutely. And this is part of what Emoto proved with his research and other scientists on other levels. So absolutely that's the case. And I believe another reason why this is so relevant is with all the stuff that's now coming out about free speech versus hate speech. Yeah. And of course, every time a mass murderer or the shooter in Las Vegas or the one in Florida last year, the media always, or most always, some are finally doing less of it, sticks their photo on the TV screen, and even with my remote, it still takes a second or two to get to another channel to get rid of that. I can feel the negativity and the depression and the bad stuff that's happening, being forced to look at something that that has that level of negativity built into it and attached to it. And one wonders whether the media knows that, and that's why they're doing that, which of course takes us into another whole level.
Oh, yeah.
But what I can tell you back from many, many studies for over 4 or 5 decades is that what we see with advertising, and actually what started with Sigmund Freud and his nephew, and the rise of propaganda and advertising, the first rule of that is repetition, repetition, repetition.
Absolutely, yes.
So when we're confronted with negative images or stories, or what we saw with 9/11 when the buildings were coming down, played over and over and over on TV, that sets up an internal resonance, and it takes effort to get rid of that because it's implanted directly into the subconscious mind, and the people that are doing that have to know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no doubt about it. I'm so glad you brought that up, and that is going down another rabbit hole that we could certainly talk about. And I know some in our audience are going to say, okay, well, you got Las Vegas and 9/11, two of the biggest possible conspiracies out there. This is not what this is about. But, and the point you're making, Stephen, is that the media, being perhaps somewhat complicit in the propagandizing of these stories in and of itself, is a sin. And I'm glad you brought that up. Let me ask you a question. Let's see. One of the things I wanted to, let's take a look at, you're talking about advertising and propaganda and repetition of stories, and most of which I always say, if it bleeds, it doesn't make, if it
bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads. But then I came up with, these days, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't make the cut. Get it?
Yep.
So, meaning 90% of our newscasts are negative. So do you feel that this is designed to keep us in a negative and disempowered state, that the media is a part of this?
Well, yes, and there's many people who come at it from a more scientific level, or perhaps who worked inside and know that that's going on. And many people who work in the media don't know that. But if your editor says, if you don't give me this, you're not going to get on the air. And if you try to put this positive story out, feel-good story, we're going to lose ratings. I believe there's also an aspect of addiction that goes on. It's easy to get addicted to negativity, whether it's, and you mentioned pornography, but there's perhaps pornography that's more loving, or maybe that's not called pornography, maybe that's erotic, but so much pornography has violence attached to it. And any of that encodes that energy field into the imagery, into the sounds. And gosh, one of the first conferences I was at in 1976, I heard in my head when Dr. William Tiller was talking about quantum physics and what happens with very subtle resonance and entrainment effects of and the experience of intention. He was one of the first scientists that figured out how to measure intention, which has no mass and no physicalness, but yet it's an energy field. That music is a carrier wave of consciousness. So if you add words or imagery to it, it's that much more powerful, and that's why movies are so powerful.
Interesting. That's right. The work of Bill Tiller, amazing. So many have really zoned in on this. Well, you brought something else up that will bring me this next thing. I want to talk about cadence and vocal strength, and then we kind of touched on the emotional part of it. I don't think you can say something, particularly as a voiceover artist. You've got to be the character. You've got to morph into whomever you're reading, and I know that because I do, although I do less characters and more nonfiction. But how, Stephen, does that play in I don't know if likelihood is the word I want to use, but cadence, vocal strength, and emotion? Does that really seal the deal in terms of guaranteed it's going to have an effect on the individual that's enunciating the words, or does it matter?
Well, sure. If you're getting into that state, all what we're talking about is a state-related experience, and your state radiates out. When I was first getting involved in research in the early 1970s, the research associates that I was connecting with said, oh, well, if you're doing this, you might be interested in this research. And they would turn me on to a number of different bits of research that I might never have discovered on my own. And this was known back then. In 1977, I was in London, and Dr. George Hall showed me some of the research that he was working with that showed bankers know that you can record feelings and vibrations on recorded tape, which was his come on and proposal that since his voice was so wonderful, he was psycho-cybernetics, that he knew how to get all that consciousness to communicate through his voice. This is Dr. George Hall, very distinguished English voice. So this was known back then. And as with anything, you don't want to let the secrets out, either so that your competitors won't know about it, or that people won't be able to set up their own defenses. What I learned early on about talking back to TV or talking back to movies, when I would hear negativity, I would, spiritual teachers say, you say cancel, or change the channel very quickly so you're not continually bombarded with that kind of assault. But that's something I recognize. I'll share just one other thing, which had words, but they weren't negative words. And so this is where things get even more universal. In 1985 or so, I was contacted by a yoga teacher and said, I'm working with RCA. I'm doing a yoga video, and we're going to sell 100,000 copies, and we're going to give you a royalty of $1 per DVD. So that'll be $100,000 for you. Now, they also didn't send me a check in advance, but this is what they said. So I said, okay, how bad could it be? I've done some of these. I did one with Lilias Folan, worked with other yoga teachers. Well, when I got her video, which had the audio, her voice was so stressed, and her cadence, her breathing was so erratic that in the studio, I was finding my own breathing was shallow and irregular, and I was really having a problem with it. So I told the engineer, okay, tell you what we're going to do. Turn off her audio. I'll just record my music based on her movements. And even that was, I actually had to go to the bathroom to throw up. I mean, there was so much tension that was coming through the video, even without the sound. So that was a breakthrough. And I called her, and then I was directed to her lawyer. Said, well, you can't back out of the contract. And I said, well, I can't do this project. I mean, it's making me physically sick. And they said, well, you signed the contract, and we're going to sue you for $100,000. And I said, bring it on, because I will play your video in court, and we'll stress out all the jurors, and they'll toss your case out. At which point they stopped communicating with me. I never heard from them again.
Isn't that something? Well, this is directly related to what we're talking about here.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Could it be that some people, I know that you're very sensitive, and I mean that in a positive way. You're very tuned in. So you're somewhat of an empath. I think you soak in like a sponge, and I'm the same way. And for people like that, for people like us, we definitely need to kind of pace ourselves, because we can take in, I can walk into a room and there may be somebody that hasn't said a word to me, but I'll feel it. That's well known. But I mean, it sounds like you fell immediately into resonance with that which was the dominating, through stress, but it was the dominating energy. That doesn't make it good. It's just dominating. It's louder energy. And you ended up falling into resonance with that. So that's just amazing to me. I had another point that I forgot, but nonetheless, I'd like you to continue. So there you go. The tone of the voice, the cadence, of course.
Right. Now, on the other end, you mentioned cadence.
Yeah.
Do you know that many of the pastor training seminars and workshops, where if you are perhaps in certain denominations, you are taught to have the voice roll so that your voice becomes rhythmic, and in that rhythm sets up I don't want to say an addictive, but a hypnotic resonance and a hypnotic entrainment, and then your message gets received by the subconscious mind more powerfully. How this is often sold. Who was reporting on this? In 1980, Richard Sutton was reporting on this. He got to one of those seminars because he was a hypnotist, so he knew about the hypnotic qualities of voice, and voice roll is how that's called. And he said these some of these training seminars said, when you use these techniques, you can double the amount of money you get from the donation.
Right.
So they knew what they were doing.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, aren't we talking about NLP, some aspect of neuro-linguistic programming?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure that this has been well known in areas of psychology, particularly in marketing and advertising. And who comes to mind, someone that you know quite well, is Dr. Eldon Taylor and the extraordinary work that he's done. It's Taylor, right? Eldon Taylor.
Yes.
I have it. In fact, I got his book right here called Mind Programming. And obviously he goes into excruciating detail, not only on sound, but particularly on imaging, subliminal imaging. This is an old thing, but still there are people that are either they've heard it and it's just going over their head, or they don't believe it because they continue. And you make a good point, Stephen, when in this age of hate speech being first and foremost and prominent, and, identity politics and all the words that go with it. People need to be aware of what's coming out of their mouth. Go back to, if you would, you were bringing up an example of looking at a TV or movie and talking back to it, particularly if it's in disgust or whatever. I want to make sure I understood what you were saying. The advice that you were given is don't do that, right? Don't get into a dialogue with the dialogue that you're hearing.
No.
Oh, okay.
What I was saying was, talk back, because that breaks the hypnotic trance. That breaks the spell. That makes it conscious rather than unconscious. And if you can't change the channel or mute what's going on, it breaks the trance is the wording that I was taught. Last night I was channel surfing on TV a little bit. I saw I guess it's a new TV program, The Wisdom of the Crowd. Mm-hmm. And it dealt with hate speech and free speech and some of the issues that clearly come from the headlines right now. And when they flashed to some of the signs that the protesters were holding as they were marching around and doing the demonstration, I felt in my solar plexus and in my heart chakra a pain and a stress. And I could mute immediately, but I just had to change the channel. You're just looking at that negativity. It's exactly what we're talking about. I did not know it was coming, so I was not ready for it, and it was painful.
You've referenced this before, specifically with you. I remember you talking about the buzzing or the very low hum a refrigerator was making, and how was it the refrigerator or TV or maybe both? So again,
TV makes a high sound, refrigerator makes a low sound.
Right. But you're picking up on some things in a way that maybe other people are not. So again, I go back to, could some people be much more sensitive to this, or is it affecting all of us? Nobody's immune.
Both. Some people are much more sensitive. Some people's hearing is much more acute, like me. Mm-hmm. I could hear the silent fan of a plasma TV 12 years ago when I got my first big screen.
Right.
And I got rid of that. And the people who had to take it back at the store said, no one has ever complained about that before. But I was aware, and here's how because I wasn't even hearing it at first, with all the other sounds that we have going on softly in the background. But I noticed that when I was watching TV, after I moved up from my Sony, the last of the CRT, which had the high frequency scanning sound, that I was always hungry, and I basically could not stop eating, and a lot of those would turn more to sweets when I was watching this new TV.
Yeah.
And I turned it off, and I was still having that problem. It wasn't until I pulled the plug out of the wall that I heard something go, ooh.
Huh.
Then it was fine. And that was an internal fan that they never talked about. I could barely even find it in the owner's manual, but that was the culprit. And that was really interesting for me, that I heard something that obviously most people don't hear, but in the same way I hear high sounds. My hearing acuity has been tested in audiology labs, and I hear beyond normal human hearing. Mm-hmm. That's a mixed blessing. But whether you hear it or not, you are most likely affected by it, but some people are much less affected by it than others. And just as with electromagnetic pollution, some people may not be affected by it, or some people may not be affected enough to recognize it, and it doesn't affect their well-being. Just like some people, they have literally thicker skin, and they don't get hot or cold as much as somebody else.
Right.
Being in the room with someone who needs it hot, whether it's a girlfriend or someone else, you get to know very quickly that people have different levels that they're comfortable at, and that's their level of sensitivity. They're not wrong, but it's different than me, and they couldn't understand my experience because they're not having it.
Mm-hmm.
And that went back to my father when I was a kid, complaining about the low rumble of the refrigerator affecting my stomach and causing gas, which is what was, not of concern to him, but was pissing him off. He said, "How come you have so much gas?" And I said, "Well, I couldn't say it's because of Mom's cooking." And then we learned that she was cooking tomato sauce in aluminum cans, and that was creating toxins in the food, even though she cooked them with love. But the sound of the refrigerator was literally rumbling and resonating in my stomach area, and causing, as I would later learn from my research, changing acetic acid to acetylene gas.
Isn't that something?
The work of Dr. Podolsky in 1920s knew that about digestion. So that was one of the early things I would write about in my first books, that these things could have an effect. But it didn't affect my father. And he actually said to me, "It doesn't affect me, so how could it affect you?
Right.
So shut up and eat your peas."
Yeah, I remember you. Oh my goodness. Wow. I remember you sharing something similar. I think it was the refrigerator story. I know I had heard the plasma TV story. Wow. This will take us in a whole nother direction. Let's touch on this. So what you're saying is that it's not only the foods that we're eating, God only knows with the GMOs and the crap that we're being peddled every day. Too many people are still taking in, literally. That's enough to cause all that stuff. But look at all of the technological, quote, advancements that are eliciting even more of these sorts of things. And have you noticed how many commercials are for gas, issues and digestive issues?
Oh, yeah.
So would it be fair to say, Steven, that we're swimming in a sea of gas producing or, acid producing, even beyond the food, in the technology?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just gas producing, but we look at some of the trends and some of the research that has gone on, and is now, some of it is being shut down by shutting down the research grants of some of the leading EMF, electromagnetic pollution scientists, like Dr. Ole Johnson in Sweden, that the effects on our human nervous system, we're swimming in a sea of electromagnetic frequencies that we've never had to deal with biologically for most of humanity's existence. Only in the last 20 or 30 years have a lot of these been happening, and under the guise of making our lives more easy or more
efficient,
accessible or efficient or whatever, we are allowing so much more of these electromagnetic frequencies have basically been untested. The chemicals might be tested on their own, but not in combination. And that's where we're seeing the GMO and the other new developments having so many deleterious effects. Going back, one other thing, back in when I was in college, when I got into macrobiotics and I started developing my sensitivity to foods, we found that some of the stores that were supposedly selling organic foods were lying.
Yeah.
And how my friends and I would identify that, they would hire me to go with them to the store, like with an apple, and they would give me a bite of the apple. And if I had to go to the bathroom in a minute or two, they said, "This one has a spray on it, it's not organic." So I was feeling this 40 years ago, but now you look at the rise of ADHD, you take a look at the rise of Alzheimer's, you take a look at so many things that are all very possibly linked to what's going on in this ocean of frequencies that have never been tested, and now that at least California just stopped the spread of the 5G technology.
I was just going to bring up 5G. Can't have this conversation. There's still a lot of people out there that have no idea what we're talking about. Huge in the yeah. You want to speak about that a little bit, Stephen, because I know you're all over that.
Cell phones, microwave towers have been known to emit a variety of frequencies, and some of them are not that good. What's going on right now, I saw at least maybe only one news report on CNN, or maybe it was the script that was going at the bottom, where the embassy in Cuba is being irradiated with microwaves, they said, and is causing hearing damage to the embassy officials and the people who work there. So they were all moving out. Well, this was going on in Moscow in the 70s or 80s, when the people who were working there were being bombarded by negative frequencies. So we know that this is possible. And then we just haven't heard much about it. But the fact that there was not just psychological effects, but hearing damage, and we might have to Google it to find out if a lot of that has been wiped, but that's related to politics and function of people in an embassy. Because people want better cell phone reception, Verizon and some of the other companies say, well, we've moved up from 3G, and even better than 4G is going to be 5G, and we need this, which means instead of just having a microwave tower in town or on top of one church, we need it on like every 5 buildings. So no one is going to be immune from it. And the prospect of being irradiated constantly for people, and it could be maybe as much as 15 to 20% of the population who is sensitive, the 80% say, well, it's good for us, so we don't care. We've had these discussions. I've seen it in the papers. Who are you to tell me I can't get better cell phone reception? Well, it's just like with smoking. I don't tell you you can't smoke, but your right to smoke stops at my nose. I don't want to get your secondhand smoke in my house. But with microwaves, I get the microwaves from my neighbor who lives above me and has a router and a tower, a mini tower in their own home to increase reception. And both of their kids are ADHD. And I mentioned that to them. I said, do you know that there's research that points out the relationship? And they basically said, we don't believe that. Get out of our house. And that was the last time they spoke, which is fine on one level, and happily they finally moved. But that's what we're facing, and we're facing this rollout. And what I've heard about the 5G is not just for cell phones, but that's going to be part of the driverless technology for automobiles. So there's a long range vision that they have. The problem is it might be good for the driverless cars, but it's not good for the drivers.
That's right. I wish I were more well-schooled on this whole 5G rollout. I'm going to make it a point to. I'm certainly aware that there's been a lot of discussion about the dangers, and there are people that have gone into really, really great, done some great work on that. So that's definitely something. Oh boy, so much. Well, listen, I'm looking at the time here. We're going to be winding down in about 10 or 15 minutes, and there are a few more things I want to get to, but I want to get back to the spoken word thing, because that's where we're going. Although all of these things are related, this is all about our well-being and how to mitigate the risks that are all around us. Let me read you something, Stephen, that I found just today. I found this small statement in an article written by a Dr. Sharon Bonds, PhD. I'm not familiar with her work at all. I actually just ran in to this article today. But she's a practicing psychologist, and she specializes in women's emotional health as a psychologist. And what I found here was quite interesting. Let me read this quote to you. She says, Spoken words are units of expressions that carry vibrations and spirits as a means for the provider to convey to the recipient their feelings, emotions, warnings, faith, hope, and thoughts. Words have energy vibrations and spirits attached to them that affects both the sender and receiver while opening up vibrations that invoke feelings and emotions into the recipients, and those spirits are invoked by the provider's intent. I think you know where I'm going here. Emphasis on spirits. That's the key word here. Do you feel that certain words can have the influence of spirits or moreover spirits attached to them? Now we're going to go a little metaphysical, but let's do that.
Well, that's one of the most ancient understandings of the power of words. And long before Jesus was talking about the power of words, many other spiritual teachers were. And if the words don't necessarily have spirits attached to them when you speak them and when you think them for self-talk or whatever, but when you speak them, it broadcasts that it's out there, and it's like putting out a radio signal. And if there are lower vibrational spirits that are tuned into those words, you will attract that in the same way that we're told if you work with a Ouija board, that will attract certain things. So whether it's attached to or attracting, the net result is that you get some stuff that you may not realize you're attracting.
That's heavy because go ahead, please.
And one of the other aspects, of course, of how do you mitigate that? Well, that's what I've dedicated my career to, both with music that empowers the innate intelligence of the individual, which will override the negative programming, and also then amplifying those effects with positive affirmations recorded subliminally. So these are, albums with subliminal affirmations. And, again, Louise Hay was certainly one of the great teachers who brought the power of affirmations, written affirmations, spoken affirmations, and at least in some cases, subliminal affirmations out to the world. It's something that I got turned on to early on in my career and helped me write my first book when I wrote some of my own affirmations that affirmed to myself that I enjoyed writing the book. I was making progress every day. I worked through writer's block, and my efficiency was transformed. So I've had many cases where I validated this myself. Many other people have had experiences where you can mitigate the negative response by putting in some positive program. If you give, whether it's just with the music or the beat or the tones, as opposed to just sitting there and taking, even in a hotel room, I always bring my own little sound system or now, on headphones, because there are so many sounds in hotel rooms that I'm not used to and that are negative for my body, that if I feed my body and hearing apparatus and my mind positive alternatives, our bodies will generally choose the more positive option if you give it a choice. But if it has no choice, it's naturally going to resonate to the more deleterious frequencies. So that's why I surround myself with positive frequencies in sounds and colors and aromas, etc., because it supports my own innate intelligence.
Absolutely. We always have the choice. See, this is why I had to have you on for this, and love having you on, because you are the number one advocate for taking your life back into your own hands. Forgive the cliche. Do what makes you feel good. And again, we could get into the psychology of why people tend to be attracted to negativity and scary movies and ugly words. But when you realize, as you so articulately put, yes, we can make the choice to fix that immediately, unless you want to just live in hell.
And the first step is awareness.
Awareness.
And that's why when I was yelling back at movies or TVs, when I didn't like what was being said or when there was negativity, that again breaks the trance, but it gives you a choice and it makes you aware that something is going on, as opposed to being unaware and then just being, zapped without any defense.
Yeah. I'm smiling broadly because I have a habit of so much crap on, and unfortunately, I'm not a big television watcher, and I do watch the news because of what I do, but I am constantly yelling back not only at news segments, because I'm looking at it from a different perspective, but even commercials. I'm not even going to get into that. I'm going to tell you something off the air that I just discovered that's just completely disgusting. I mean, it just goes on and on. Once you can see patterns in what we're being zapped with every day in terms of our quote media, you can't turn back. You never look at anything the same, I should say. Listen, I'm talking fast because I want to make sure we get in a couple of things here. And then we're going to close in. By the way, everyone, I want you to go because Steven's music is just incredible. Many of us know he is Grammy nominated, and I believe will be soon Grammy awarded. He will have a Grammy in his nice home, but he's been nominated for a Grammy, and because of his wonderful album Deep Alpha. So if you go to Steven, and I want to correct me if I'm wrong, it's both Steven with a V. Halpern.com or Inner Peace Music, Steven. That's still, because I went there and it kind of led me to Steven Halpern. But what's your default domain now? Is it Steven Halpern?
The simplest one is StevenHalpern.com, but
Got it.
The label name Inner Peace Music will get you to the same place.
Okay, perfect. And of course, we'll make sure to have both linked to this interview. But
right, and what I would recommend is the more recent albums since 2010 and 11, as I was going through more stress from the 4G and from other things happening in the environment. I wanted to make more like industrial strength albums for myself. I shared them with other people, and they said, this is really even better than your earlier recordings. So Deep Alpha, Deep Theta, have the brainwave entrainment in addition to the music and a very deep state of balance that I was in when I was recording. And then albums with subliminal affirmations. I'm just finishing one for ADHD, both for kids and for adults. The album that I have called Optimal Health at the Speed of Sound has some of the quotes from Dr. Chopra and Dr. Hyman, who are talking about the power of words and the power of communicating with ourselves and our cellular consciousness, our DNA, that we can take steps. And, if you wait for that to show up on a streaming service, you might be waiting a long time. It's something that I believe everyone should have in their sound medicine cabinet at home. So you could, even if you play just one song, a day, listen to that. It'll reorient your body, mind, and spirit to a positivity state rather than a negativity state.
Love it. Go there, everyone. Go there. I've been there. Get that music. We need it now more than ever. Certainly do. And by the way, a little plug for Steven and I together. I don't know if you know, well, hopefully some of you know because you've got it. I had the pleasure of working with him on what we call transformation through spiritual wellness, in which I did a guided meditation over one of the tracks from Deep Alpha. And I love talking about that, and I love playing it for folks. And if you go to my website, higherjourneys.com, you can find out how to get it. So it was a pleasure and an honor to work with you on that, Steven. Now, listen, we're going to close out with something quite urgent, and I want to give this deserves a few minutes of y'all's time out there. For those of you that don't know, Steven is out in Northern California right now amidst these horrific wildfires. And I have to say, when I called Steven, on the fly and said, Steven, can you hook me up and come on the show? I want to talk about this. Do you know, and shame on me, it didn't even dawn on me. And I know you live there, of course, but it escaped me for a moment when you said that you're dealing with swollen eyes because of the fires. And I thought, oh my gosh, of course you're there. Give us a short report on where you are right now, where everyone is with these fires. Not the media report, your report. What's going on?
The areas that had the major fires and the firestorms, some of them are wiped out. Entire communities, neighborhoods, stores, wineries. Many are still working, but a lot of the, there's 6,000 homes basically that are where people don't have any place to go back to. The fires, are, if not out, are finally contained. After the rain we had a couple of days ago, it's the first time I've seen blue sky in basically 2 weeks, and I'm 40 miles away from the closest fires, 100 miles from some of the other ones. The first night it was happening, I walked outside after the first report that it was just a 200-acre fire, and I walked outside and said, "Why is it snowing?" And then I realized that's ash, and I was over 50 miles away. I went to bed. I woke up. I was feeling terrible. I could barely open my eyes, and turned on the news. And, of course, that was the first night that things had gone from 200 acres to almost 100,000 acres. And it is just it moved so quick that a lot of people only had seconds to leave, which is unbelievable. California used to be famous for earthquakes, but when an earthquake comes, it's a surprise, and then it's over. This firestorm, it's devastated so many lives. We were still only dealing with the beginning of understanding how to put people's lives back, because there was already a housing shortage in Northern California, and suddenly you have people who've had homes. Some were the lower income homes. A lot were in the higher income areas. These homes took a year or two to build over many, many years. The enormity of building homes, just as it is in Puerto Rico, where are all the contractors and the builders and the building supplies to come from? Some of the big stores that had the building supplies burned up. They had a lot of lumber there, so they burned up. So on every level, it's bizarre. And what I knew I could feel in my heart and in my brain was the being stunned and dazed. That is in my life, there have been very few times that I've had that experience, and I was 50 miles away. So I was picking up on the pain and the grief and the fear and the stunned and dazedness of hundreds of thousands of people, and I knew that's what it was. But it was difficult to get past that for a couple of days, and the fact that I couldn't open my basically could barely even open my eyes, could not go outside without a mask for a couple of minutes. I lived inside with the air filter on. I'm going, what about the people who, and you think about the first responders, they are working right next to the fire. They're fully in smoke, and yes, they have respirators, but there again, and they sign up for the job. They're built for that. It's changed that area of Northern California, right above San Francisco, the wine country, and up north, if not forever, for the rest of my lifetime, and the rest of a lot of lifetimes. So it's a major, major change. Now, did that fire start from just sparks from lightning or from something else, or just the fact that all the trees were so dry that any spark would cause something? All of those are possible. We know back from Southern California, the Santa Ana winds always come at this time of the year. So California, we've known that, October is both the most beautiful weather month, but it's also bring the dry winds. And there have been some of the worst fires in Oakland about 25 years ago, 1991, and some other big fires in this area, but nothing as big as this.
Nothing as big as this. Wow. Listen, everyone, we need to send prayers. Well, that's what I was going to say. I am imploring everyone in the Higher Journeys audience, especially after this discussion about the power of the spoken word, we'll call it a prayer, a meditation, words that will heal. Say them out loud. Come up with a little affirmation for yourself to help heal and rebuild and stop this madness out there. Will you? I am asking everyone out there to keep Steven, to say a prayer to keep Steven and everyone all over the planet, for goodness sakes, with all that's going on. But particularly, let's slay one dragon at a time. This is the one that's right in front of us right now. It needs to stop. So with that said, and it will, and there's good coming. There has to be. I have
You
to.
know,
Yeah.
if we could just bring one other specific bit of information.
Sure.
Huffington Post just posted some of the work of the New Academy by Tom DeLonge,
Yes.
and who's working with used to be the punk rock group Blink
182. Yeah. Yeah.
There is technology hope. Stephen Greer and his book Unacknowledged, talking about there is technology that can change some of this, but it's being kept from us.
Mm-hmm.
If more people started getting aware of that and demanding that we make use of that, there's a chance that we can turn this thing around. Without it, we're just going to see more fires and more disasters.
I agree. I'm going to have those links. I'm going to have
Oh, great.
Tom DeLonge's name keeps coming up. In fact, I'm supposed to be on Jimmy Church's show. We haven't set a date yet, but we're going to chat about that a little bit. So thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to make sure to have those links. So listen, Steven Halpern, I don't want you to hang up because I want us to do a proper goodbye.
Okay.
It's so long, but I'm going to sign off for now on our show. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for bringing, as always, such incredible knowledge and wisdom to our Higher Journeys audience, and having the benefit of all of your many, many years of knowledge. You're brilliant, man. I love you for it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And stay tuned, everyone. God bless.
God bless. If there was ever an old adage that has proven to be completely untrue, this is it. Words can hurt you. Not only the words you hear from others, but of those you speak yourself. And now there's science to support just that. Fortunately, because Sue had the presence of mind to immediately stop her recording contract, she's now back to a more normal and positive way of life. This is important stuff. I would urge you to become aware of what words and thoughts surround you on a daily basis. Pay attention to how you feel when you take in or speak out certain words. And then, as Stephen told us, if the words aren't suiting you for your highest good, then simply cancel. It's that simple. To learn more about this fascinating subject, I urge you to visit higherjourneys.com, where we will have links to all of the great science and researchers that Stephen mentioned in this episode. As always, I appreciate your tuning in to Higher Journeys Radio. Until next time, I'm your host, Alexis Brooks.